Got a great show for you tonight. We've got in hour number 2, Texas promoter Rudy Boy Gonzalez will be joining us. But to get us started off tonight, we've got the original Patriot, Del Wilkes, in the house with us. How you doing, Del?
Doing good. How are you guys doing?
Oh, man, we're doing really well. I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite a while. You've been one of my favorites for many years. You know, I guess.
Well, I appreciate that.
I mean, I remember you. I'm old, Del. I remember you back when you were the trooper.
So well, if you're old, I'm probably older than you, so that makes
you're about 3 years older than I am. But tell us a little bit about how you got started. I guess before you got into the AWA. I mean, when you got your real big break, like I said, you were the trooper, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But how did you actually get started in the business? What made you decide you wanted to be a professional wrestler?
Well, I've always been a big fan. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. I've been here basically all my life, and used to go to the Township Auditorium here in Columbia and watch Mid-Atlantic and then NWA wrestling, and just grew up a fan. Was also a big football fan. I played football here at the University of South Carolina, and I graduated in 1984 and then pursued a career in NFL, and that didn't work out for me. After a couple of years, I was released, and I had made my mind up that whenever football was over, and at that point I considered it over.
What team did you play for, Del?
I was in Tampa Bay in 1985 and Atlanta in 1986. Okay. And when the Falcons released me, I had other opportunities to sign on with some other teams, but I chose not to at that point in time. I made my mind up that I wanted to pursue a career in professional wrestling, and Lillian Ellison, the fabulous Moolah, was also a Columbia native and had a wrestling school here in Columbia. Now, it was really geared more toward girls, but there were some guys there that had been through the school that were sort of helping train guys that were coming through the school. So I paid my money and went through the school, and that's how it all started. It was the very infancy of my career.
How long did it take you to get through training with Moolah, and what do you think of her guidance in getting you started in the business?
Well, it was honestly very minimal. Again, it was more geared toward girls probably. But let me say there had been more women through that school or camp than there had been guys, and the guys that she had hanging around there were just guys that worked on whatever shows she ran here locally. Occasionally, she would send them up to work for Vince and to just do enhancement matches. They used to refer to them as jobbers or then enhancement guys. And basically, that was all their career had ever been. So it wasn't an awful lot. I mean, they taught me the basics, how to take a bump, and that was about it, really. And, she had no influence on my career. She helped open no doors for me. Didn't ask her to. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying that she had no influence on my career whatsoever, other than the fact that I went through her school. Every door that was opened throughout my career, I opened it myself. I had no family or no friends that had ever been in the business. And, I just had to do it all on my own. So other than going through her school, that was really the extent of any influence she would have had on my career.
So before you hooked up with Vern, I guess what promotions and stuff were you working through, and what territories? Because we were still in territory days back then, right?
Well, it was at the very latter stages of territories. There weren't many territories left, really. I worked just basically independent shows around the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. I went up and worked for Mid-South. It was on its last leg at that time. Lawler was still there, and of course, Jarrett ran the company, or I guess was the money behind it. But Jeff Jarrett was there. Matter of fact, the very first tag team partner I ever had in the business was when I was working for Mid-South, and it was Scott Steiner. They put Scott Steiner and I together, and
really?
We had white tights on us and white masks, and they called us the Wrestling Machines. Sid was there. Taker was there. Of course, he wasn't Undertaker at the time. Brian Lee was there. Dutch Mantel. So there were some guys that, were in the early parts of their career with me and Scotty Steiner and Sid and, of course, Taker. We were all there at the same time.
That's very cool. So how did you get hooked up with Vern? I guess how did he find you, and how did you guys end up coming up with the Trooper gimmick?
Well, they while I was still working Mid-South, I would come back to South Carolina and work shows around here. And Moolah had on one of the local shows that she ran here in Columbia, she had brought Wahoo in. Wahoo was working for Vern at the time. He would still wrestle, he'd still work, but he was also booking talent. And Wahoo was his permanent residence was in Charlotte. And while he was home for a couple of weeks in Charlotte, Moolah booked him on a show here in Columbia. And that's the first time I met Wahoo. And we really hit it off immediately. There was that football background. Of course, he was a great college football player, an NFL player. So that gave us some common ground. And it wasn't long after that when he went back up to Minneapolis to go back to work for Vern that he called me and wanted me to come up. And so I went up, and the first couple of months I was up there working for Vern, at that time they had that 4 to 5 o'clock spot on ESPN Monday through Fridays. But I wasn't doing the Trooper yet. There was a guy that worked for Lillian on these little shows she worked around Columbia that had a full-time job as a deputy sheriff. He worked as the super enforcer. It was a sort of a Trooper-looking gimmick. And he called me one day when I was up in Minneapolis and asked, he said, if I send you a tape of myself and a photo, he said, would you pass it on to Wahoo? And Ray Stevens was working in the office at the time as well. He said, would you pass it on to those guys and see if they'd be interested in me? I passed it on to him. He was a buddy of mine. About a week later, Wahoo came to me and said, hey, that tape you gave me, that boy down in South Carolina, he said, he doesn't have any future in the business. We're not interested in him, but we like the gimmick. And I talked with Greg and Vern, and we've got an idea for you, and we're going to call it the Trooper. So actually it came from, someone sending me a tape that I passed on to Wahoo.
Very cool. Let's kick it on over to, again, my cohort in crime, Zane Paisley. Zane, what do you got for the Troopers?
Well, I definitely remember those shows after school on ESPN. So how much of it, did you go from not many people knowing who you were to being recognized because of that show?
Yeah, it did. It was extremely helpful in giving my career a boost. TV is a very, very, very powerful thing. And that basically worldwide exposure. I mean, ESPN wasn't the worldwide giant that it is now, but still it did go worldwide into other countries. And, it did boost my career and give me a bump. And, it opened some doors for me. I got booked in Japan the very first time, for Mr. Baba in All Japan because of that TV exposure and working as the Trooper. And, it was very instrumental in helping my career.
Well, now I always have to ask our guests that have been to Japan, have you been to Ribera Steakhouse, and do you still have the jacket?
I don't have the jacket. I've been to Ribera for anyone that's never been. It is a legendary place where the pro wrestlers go. I think I went twice, and I worked over there. I think I did probably 50 tours to Japan, if not more, and I went to Ribera's twice. It is, if you ever see it, it's not what you would imagine it to be. It is literally 6 bar stools. And that's it. Six, maybe 8 bar stools at the most. It's a greasy spoon. It's nasty. The guy was always good to the boys. He'd give you free steaks and free jacket, and he played Elvis music all the time. So maybe that was the attraction, but I went once or twice, and I got a jacket, and I think after I got the jacket, I never went back. That was sort of a status symbol, was to be able to back then walk around with a Ribera jacket on. That meant you were somebody. You had arrived in the wrestling world. But I think after my second visit, I never went back.
Was it a gray satin jacket, or did you have did they specially make a red, white, and blue one for you?
Well, actually, the one I got wasn't flag red, but it was more gamecock garnet.
Oh, nice.
Than it was actually red. So it was more in line with the gamecock colors.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's kick it on over to the Morning Star, Will Huckabee.
Yeah, Mr. Wilkes. I would like to actually ask you a question, being the only wrestler here on the panel. Um, how difficult, going back, when you first got to the AWA, what was the atmosphere like when you first got there, being fairly new to the business? Was you received very well, away from the gimmick? And how hard was it to really get in with the boys?
Well, it wasn't hard to get in with the boys. I mean, some of the guys were a little maybe standoffish initially. I think maybe a lot of guys are that way when there's new, young talent, in the locker room. But, I had worked a ton of shows prior to that with Wahoo down in the Carolinas with Ray Stevens. For you guys with some wrestling history, or some knowledge of wrestling history, Ray Stevens was one of the great workers ever. And Ray was up there. So I was, had already established a good relationship with Ray and Wahoo. And that helped bridge the gap once I got there with the other guys. That relationship with Wahoo and Ray helped, just helped sort of make things an easy transition with the other guys. And, the gimmick, the character was received very well. Now, we didn't work in front of a lot of full houses back then because the AWA was really on life support at that point in time. They didn't run full time. We did TV twice a month, and then we'd work a few spot shows off that. But, we did not work a full-time schedule. But, so you didn't work in front of a lot of full houses. We did a lot of county fairs and state fairs. And originally when I first got there, they were still doing their TV show at that place in Vegas, the Showboat, I think it was called, the Showboat Arena in Vegas. They would tape their TV there. But eventually we ended up doing it in Rochester, Minnesota. Someplace it was a lot closer that did not require them flying all the guys out to Vegas because they just didn't have the financial means at that time to do that. They were really struggling. It was a mix. It was a lot of young and up and coming guys there with a lot of maybe guys that were sort of starting the backside of their career. They would bring Nikita Koloff in. They'd bring Sergeant Slaughter in. They had, Ox Baker would come in. Zbyszko was there. Of course, Zbyszko was married into the Gagne family, so, he was always going to be there. So you had some young up-and-coming talent, and then you had some established guys there. But it was a good crew. It was a fun crew to work with.
Yeah, you mentioned you came there from the Carolinas and stuff. How much different was the work style up in the Midwest and the Minneapolis area as compared to the Carolinas? I'm a Carolina guy, so I grew up with the more character-based driven wrestling. So how big of a change was that for you?
Well, it wasn't that big of a deal. I know a lot of the shows I had worked down south, you did a lot more walking and talking, and you did a lot more things, as you said, the character-driven stuff. But once you got in the ring, even though they didn't do that much of that stuff up there, once you got in the ring, it's still headlock, tackle, leapfrog, arm drag, get it again. So it really, once inside the ring, nothing really changed.
Well, Rick, do you have any questions for the Patriot?
Of course I do. Of course I do. You were mentioning, Dell, that Larry Zbyszko and Ox Baker came in, Sergeant Slaughter was in. We also had Super Snuka was in there. Obviously, Colonel De Beers was around. So there was a lot of talent in the AWA, even towards the end. But I guess I want to get your take on a young guy who was coming in at the time that hadn't been heard before, that came in as a manager. Can you tell us about your time with Diamond Dallas Page at all?
Well, by the time I got there, or when I got there, of course, Paul Diamond was still there, and Pat Tanaka was still there, but I only think I worked one show with Page. Page
really?
Page left, or they quit using Page right before I got there, and I think the only show I may have ever worked with him was the last show they did at the Showboat in Vegas, the last TV taping they had out there. Now, that was also, I don't know for sure if it was the start of Bischoff's career, but Bischoff was our color analyst. Yeah, he was our announcer, and of course that getting to be to know Bischoff through that, getting to be pretty good friends with him, was what eventually led to me going to WCW and working there when he was running WCW But no, Page. I think I was only on one show with Page when he was working with Bad Company.
If I recall right, when we were talking to the Page, he was telling us that he actually he maybe only worked a couple road shows and did like 6 television tapings in one day, and that was all his entire time with the AWA, and it was stretched over 8 or 9 months.
Yeah,
at least it made it look like it.
Yeah, I don't, I was around him very little when he was there. I think it was just, like I said, one show that I can recall. But now I later ran into him again in WCW when we were both working there. But heck, you talk about old. Page was old back then, man. He's ancient.
We lost a couple AWA legendary announcers, Larry Nelson. We lost Lee Marshall, both this year. I guess what's your thoughts remembering those two guys?
Well, you're telling me something I was totally unaware of. I did not realize that they both passed.
They both passed.
Man, I hate it.
In the last couple months.
Wow. I tell you, Larry Nelson I thought was a bit overdramatic in what he did on TV. Not knocking him as a person, as an individual, but as his persona and character on TV, I thought was a little bit overdramatic. But again, somebody's calling me, I see phone's ringing. But then again, that's a very overdramatic business. Lee Marshall, I thought, had a great voice, one of the best voices ever for any color analyst or announcer. I thought he had a great voice and did a good job. Both did a good job.
Well, heck, he was Tony the Tiger.
He was?
Yeah.
Well, you're telling me a lot I didn't know tonight. I did not realize that.
Yeah, Lee Marshall actually did the role of Tony the Tiger on commercials.
Wow. What about that? Well, again, that just goes to the point I said. The guy had a great voice. I mean, just a great voice, one of the best. But I was able to work around some good announcers. When I was a kid here in South Carolina, we got Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling on Saturday mornings, and that's when it still came from a TV studio. And then every other Saturday night at 11 o'clock, we could get Florida Championship Wrestling. If you were lucky and the reception could come in and you could get those rabbit ears turned the right way, you could pick up Florida Championship Wrestling. And, of course, Gordon Soley was the announcer there. And then later on in my career in WCW, got to know Gordon and work with Gordon. And I think maybe probably the greatest wrestling announcer ever. Got to work with Ross and, of course, Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan. So got to work with some very good wrestling announcers.
Yes, you did. I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, we can go on all day about how many different great announcers went through the AWA and WCW both.
Yeah.
I was trying to think who else was with you during that time. Yeah, how about the greatest of all, Jake the Milkman Milliman?
Yeah, it's funny. I ran into somebody here in Columbia just by chance a couple of weeks ago. Got to talking with them, and they had just been relocated from Minneapolis. Man and wife. He works for a local power company, and we got talking, and my career came up, and they were big AWA fans, both of them. They were both from the Minneapolis area. And the very first person they asked me about if I'd ever worked with, it wasn't Vern Gagne, it wasn't Greg, it wasn't Zabisco, it was Jake. That was the very first person they asked about. And he was probably about 5'3". He was as broad as he was tall. And I tell you, we had another character there that I'm sure you guys may be aware of. It was just recently probably sent away for life, but Buck Zumhoff worked up there as well.
Rock and roll Buck Zumhoff.
Yeah, Buck's going to be awarded of the state for the rest of his life due to some horrible, horrible things he was convicted of, and he's going to be right where he needs to be.
Absolutely. So you got yourself over, I guess, before WCW. You actually went to the GWF, and I do remember that. That's where you really got your Patriot gimmick started and had just a heck of a feud. And I remember watching it. I mean, it was very intriguing to me watching this as opposed to watching, WCW shows and WWF shows at the time. I enjoyed the GWF. I enjoyed your feud with Doug Gilbert as the Dark Patriot. That was really, really cool back then. What can you tell me about your days, I guess, back in the global days?
Well, when I went and worked one tour for Baba in all Japan, and then when I got back, I'd been made aware of the fact that the AWA was done. DJ Peterson and myself had won the tag team belts, the last AWA tag team champions, and I go do a tour in Japan and come back, and the company's no longer in existence. They no longer have the TV show on ESPN. And I was contacted by the people at the Global, at GWF, about going out to Dallas and working their very first TV taping. It was going to be on a Friday night. I think it was either in May or June. I'm not sure which year it was. It was early 90s, 90, 91, something like that. And so I went out, and I really had no idea what they were going to do with me. So I took my trooper stuff, and we were all staying at the same hotel out there together. And of course, Joe Pedicino and Bonnie Blackstone and Bill Eadie were really the brains behind the company as far as booking talent and angles and things like that. And literally just hours before we were to leave to go to the Sportatorium there in Dallas and work our very first TV show, Pedicino called my room and asked me if I'd walk across the parking lot. He was almost at the parking lot, and just come to his room that he and Bonnie and Bill wanted to talk to me. And so I did, and they had a costume box there, and they pulled out the tights, the red, white, and blue tights, and a red, white, and blue mask, and a red, white, and blue vest. And we had gone in, when I say we, our armed forces had gone into Kuwait to liberate Kuwait at the time. Saddam Hussein had sent his military into Kuwait, and so naturally, at any time when your country's at war, patriotism's at a really high level, and wrestling's always done a good job of taking advantage of that and having the good American and the evil Russian or the evil Iranian. And they just said, hey, look, man, we have no problem with the trooper gimmick, but we want to make you our top babyface here, and we think this would be something that would really, really work. Based on what's going on in the Middle East right now, patriotism is just through the roof, and we think this would be a great character. And that night when I walked the aisle to go to the ring, I had never experienced the kind of response that I got. And these people had never seen the character before. They'd never seen that gimmick. And they had no idea who was doing it or had never seen it, and they just blew the roof off the place. And it literally did. It took my career to a completely different level. And so it was obvious that night that we were on to something good.
So did it give you goosebumps and chills just hearing the reaction to it? I mean, here comes a guy out here all dressed in red, white, and blue, the mask on. You had a great physique as well. I mean, what you said they popped pretty loud, but how did it feel to you when you got to hear that reaction for the first time?
Well, I was overwhelmed. It wasn't what I expected, especially with a completely unknown character. And also, too, for somebody that's, I'm a very, very patriotic individual and love my country in spite of what issues it may have, and I've always been that way. And so I just felt like they had put, the right guy was wearing that mask, and the right guy was wearing those red, white, and blue tights, because nobody loves this country any more than I do. And I took it very serious that, this was going to be the character that I was going to represent and the image that I was going to portray to the American people and the wrestling fans all over the world. So it was just validation in my mind and heart that night that I had made the right decision. They completely left it up to me. They said, you don't have to do this. If you don't want to do it, we'll work you as a trooper. We still want to make you our top babyface. But I went along with the idea that night. And the reception I got that night, solidified in my mind I've made the right decision.
Absolutely. Before we continue on, this is the Undisputed Wrestling Show. We have the original Patriot, Del Wilkes, with us tonight. Also, a good buddy of mine just looks like is called in as well, the Buckeye Big Mouth. Brad Beringer, are you here tonight?
Hey, Rick, how you doing?
I'm good. Do you have a question you want to ask the Patriot tonight?
Well, yes, I do. First of all, how you doing, Del? It's good to hear you.
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. I remember I was doing a little research, and was it you or was it somebody else? There was another Patriot, I believe.
We'll get to that after a bit, Buckeye.
Okay. I'm sorry, Rick. You have to forgive me. It's been a while since I called into your show. Okay, another question. What would you say your best road story is from traveling with GWF and then WWE?
Well, I don't really divulge a lot of road stories. Number one, they're not very G-rated, family-oriented. Secondly, it would have to include, somebody else, which most of them do. So I've got a ton of them, but because I'm not going to put somebody else's laundry out on the street, and most of the road stories that were good are not G-rated road stories, and I just so I'll choose to keep those to myself. But I will address one thing that you said a while ago about the original Patriot. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you putting it that way. There's nothing I can do about guys running around pretending to be me, but there are a couple, and it's really sickening, and it's really, I think, says a lot about them that literally use my bio, my biography, my career, pictures of me as themselves. They present themselves, literally not a picture of them with their fat, flabby butt, but a picture of me when I looked good and was in my prime and had a good body and a good physique and was at my physical best. They put those pictures up on their websites or at the shows they work and present themselves as that. Now, if they want to run around and put the mask on and call themselves a Patriot, more power to them. They're not making a whole lot of money doing it, so there's nothing that I would ever do to try to stop them from doing that. But it does chap my bottom pretty good to see themselves take literally my career and post it on their website and say that they did that. So I appreciate you bringing up the point about the original Patriot.
Well, we're definitely gonna get to that, Del. I mean, obviously we have to address it at some point. But right now, I want to celebrate your career and talk about the things that you've done, the impact you've made, and then we'll towards the end we'll talk about the infringements, I guess.